The Committee on Homeland Security Subcommittee on Border and Maritime Security will come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to examine policies that impact the Department's ability to secure the border. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Last month, a caravan of nearly 1,500 migrants was organized by Pueblo Sin Fronteras, also known as People Without Borders, an extremist advocacy group with the stated purpose of, quote, abolishing borders, unquote. Under the guise of humanitarian action, this group facilitated the movement of a migrant caravan traveling more than 2,000 miles through Mexico towards the southwest border of the United States. The caravan began in Tapachula on the Mexico-Guatemala border with the express purpose of traveling to the United States and entering our country, be it by illegal entry or utilizing loopholes in our immigration laws. The reality is that this type of activity is happening every day, in smaller numbers and without the media fanfare. Our asylum process is broken, rife with fraudulent claims. Individuals who arrive at our border have no need to dodge our border security efforts because our policies make it all too easy for them. Aliens can simply come to a port of entry or look for a Border Patrol agent and simply say that they have, quote, a credible fear, end quote. Saying these simple two words permits them to be released into the country about 90% of the time, regardless of the merits of the claim. Once released, they're given a notice to appear for a court date, sometimes years in the future, and a work permit after 180 days. In 2008, DHS asylum officers referred 5,100 cases meeting this credible fear threshold to immigration courts. In 2016, it was almost 92,000 cases. The reason for the increase is simple. Individuals have learned how to exploit the system. It should surprise no one that many of those who claim asylum do not ever show up for their court date, most likely because their claim was unfounded in the first place. In order to ensure we maximize our ability to accommodate those seeking to flee persecution, we must combat this fraud in order to help those who actually have a legitimate asylum claim who are getting lost in the sea of fraudulent ones. Another loophole stems from the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act, which is a well-meaning law and, as the name suggests, was designed to prevent human trafficking. However, the disparate treatment of children from Mexico and children from non-contiguous countries like Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador creates a perverse incentive to put young children at risk. We must end that loophole that puts children in the hands of smugglers who abuse them along the way to our border. Once these young people arrive, they are vulnerable to gang recruitment, especially the notorious MS-13, given the weakness of the vetting done on those who sponsor those children. Dangerous gangs such as MS-13 are not the only ones benefiting from these loopholes. Drug cartels control the illicit movement of people and narcotics that cross our borders. Every single migrant, whether an unaccompanied child, family unit, or single adult that illegally crosses the southwest border enriches the cartels and assists their growth and their lethality. The number of illegal border crossings during the month of March and April show an urgent need to address these glaring loopholes. We witnessed a 300% increase from April 2017 compared to April 2018, and a 37% increase from last month to this month, the largest increase month to month since 2011. Traffickers, smugglers, and extremist advocacy groups are exploiting these weaknesses and putting individuals making the journey at risk, as well as Americans who are falling victim to crimes perpetrated by bad actors who are making their way in. In addition, if we do not address this situation, we will be confronted by another generation of DACA-like people in the near future. When I was in the Air Force, I traveled all over the world, and I saw desperation and poverty that most Americans cannot fathom. Countries around the world are dealing with extreme violence, war, and gangs. And as human beings, we may be moved to help them, often through the work of charitable organizations or ministries. But the truth of the matter is that we cannot bring everyone who is suffering here. The very definition of a country is one who controls who and who does not enter. We are a nation of immigrants, and we welcome with open arms approximately 1 million legal immigrants in our country every year. However, we're also a nation of laws, and we cannot sit idly by as our borders are overrun by lawlessness. The time has come to build a policy wall alongside the physical wall to force those seeking to immigrate to the United States to do it the right way, the legal way. Congress must act to change our immigration policy and to close these loopholes. Last September, the Speaker appointed me and 7 other members, including our chairman, to a working group tasked with addressing this issue. We spent countless hours diving into our broken immigration and border policies. For the last 9 months, we've been working and refining the bill that became the Goodlatte, McCall, McSally, and Labrador bill. This bill is strong on border security, closes these legal loopholes, and ends the insanity on the border. I've received assurances from leadership that our bill will be brought before the House for a vote in June. I look forward to its consideration on the floor. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Vela, for any statement he may have.
Thank you, Chairwoman McSally. I'd first like to address the title for today's hearing. My position on the border wall is well known by now, and I would like to express my deep concern about the so-called policy wall proposed by the administration and that we are going to talk about today. As with the physical border wall, the need for a policy wall is unclear to me. The number of asylum seekers requesting protection in Mexico or the United States indicates a humanitarian problem, not necessarily a security threat. A growing number of asylum seekers are coming from Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. Most of us here today are aware that El Salvador and Honduras rank among the top 5 most violent countries in the world, including nations at war. Even former Secretary John Kelly acknowledged the dangerous and complex conditions on the ground in the Northern Triangle before he joined this administration and during his confirmation hearing. The characterization that the levels of people seeking asylum are unacceptable is confusing. Blaming and punishing the people who are seeking protection is inhumane. The conditions leading to a humanitarian crisis are unacceptable, not the people seeking protection. We should be redoubling our efforts to work with international partners to fix the source problem. Earlier this year, I joined the other Democrats on this committee in sending a letter to Secretary Nielsen opposing the practice of separating migrant parents from their children in cases that do not warrant it when they are apprehended at the border or in immigration detention. I am opposed to tearing kids away from their parents, and I am concerned about what criminalizing adult asylum seekers will mean for legal claims to protection. The effect of family separation is also traumatizing. According to more than 200 child welfare, juvenile justice, and child development organizations who wrote to Secretary Nielsen opposing family separation, there is ample evidence that separating children from their mothers or fathers leads to serious negative consequences to children's health and development. As DHS separates families at the borders, DHS will likely have to detain people over age 18 in adult immigration detention facilities and designate any children as unaccompanied. I worry that there are no reliable mechanisms in place to ensure that families can be reunified later. If an adult goes through criminal proceedings or is subjected to expedited removal, how will his or her child, who is in a shelter somewhere in the United States, know how to get in touch with them? I fear that these policies will be harmful in the long run. Lastly, I would like to hear from CBP about how you are managing your resources to address potentially more asylum seekers at our ports of entry. Given this new zero-tolerance policy for people crossing between our ports of entry along the southern border, DHS is encouraging people to claim asylum at ports of entry instead. The CBP officer staffing shortage is a persistent problem, and I would like to learn how capacity issues at ports are likely to be affected by these policy changes. I thank you for joining us today, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The chair now recognizes the chairman of the full committee, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. McCall, for any statement he may have.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for holding this important hearing. Almost 2 months ago, a caravan of more than 1,000 Central Americans began a 2,000-mile journey from Guatemala and Mexico border headed towards the United States. The journey was not easy, and the migrants were met with great difficulties: hunger, sickness, even exploitation by criminal gangs. So what motivated them to make this journey? A lawless immigrant advocacy group called Pueblos Sin Fronteras, whose specific goal is the circumvention of U.S. immigration law. They organized what they thought would be their largest blitz on the United States border, and the goal was simple: overwhelm U.S. law enforcement and tax an already overburdened immigration system with baseless asylum claims. This was not the first caravan, and it did not change our immigration policies and laws, and this will not be the last. And while this particular caravan drew lots of media attention, CBP agents and officers have seen a troubling trend. Family units and unaccompanied alien children fled across the border, many of them claiming credible fear. Almost every single person who claims credible fear meets the existing threshold in the law. Loopholes in our immigration system are well known to the organized illegal immigration groups and the brutal drug cartels who facilitate the movement of aliens across the border. In fact, cartels use these weaknesses as a shrewd marketing tool that further enriches the cartel. This harms the stability and the rule of law in Mexico. Building a physical wall along key parts of the southwest border is absolutely necessary. In tandem, we must also construct a wall of sensible policy to close these legal loopholes that put families and children at risk. Last month, we saw the number of illegal border crossings triple over the same period as last year. We have to take dramatic action to reverse this disturbing development. I was pleased to see that the department recently enacted a zero-tolerance policy for those that come here illegally. Prosecuting those who enter the country illegally is the right policy. This will send a powerful message of deterrence to those who are trying to take advantage of our immigration laws. We have used prosecution successfully in the past, and I know that myself as a former federal prosecutor. Under Operation Streamline, nearly every alien apprehended was prosecuted. And when that policy was enacted, in every instance, we saw a dramatic decline in crossings. I, along with Chairman Goodlatte and Chairwoman McSally, have proposed a robust border security and immigration enforcement bill to close these legal loopholes that Secretary Nielsen and the Honorable Homan, it's good to see you, sir, have pointed out so many times in the past, so many times. Without changes to the way we treat unaccompanied alien children and family units, and without tightening our asylum standards, there will always be powerful incentives for aliens to come to this country illegally. This must stop. The time for change has come, and I'm committed to working with this administration and other like-minded members to make that a reality. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. I ask unanimous consent that the gentlelady from Arizona, Ms. Lesko, a member of the full committee, be permitted to participate in today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. We're pleased to have three distinguished witnesses before us today. Mr. Ron Vitello is the acting Deputy Commissioner of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Previously, he served as the Chief of the U.S. Border Patrol. As its Chief Operating Officer, he was responsible for the daily operations of the U.S. Border Patrol, assisting in planning and directing nationwide enforcement and administrative operations. Mr. Thomas Homan became the Deputy Director and Senior Official performing the duties of the Director in January of 2017. Mr. Homan is a 33-year veteran of law enforcement and has nearly 30 years of immigration enforcement experience. He has served as a police officer in New York, a Border Patrol agent, a special agent with the former U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service, as well as a supervisory special agent and Deputy Assistant Director for Investigations at ICE. Mr. Francis Cisna was sworn in as Director of USCIS on October 8th, 2017. Recently, he served as the Director, Immigration Policy within the DHS Office of Policy, during which time he was selected for a detail to the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee, where he worked on immigration-related legislation. Prior to that, Mr. Cisna served as Acting Director and Deputy Director, Immigration and Border Security Policy in the DHS Office of Policy. The Chair now recognizes Deputy Commissioner Vitello for 5 minutes to testify.
Thank you. Chairwoman McSally, Ranking Member Vela, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the efforts of U.S. Customs and Border Protection to achieve our strategic and operational border security objectives. My fellow witnesses have decades of practical experience, and I'm grateful to work with such dedicated professionals to secure the homeland. Tactical infrastructure, including physical barriers and complementary capabilities, have long been a critical component of CBP's multi-layered and risk-based approach to securing our southern border. The recently passed Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2018 supports CBP's mission, including $1.4 billion for the largest investment in border wall in more than a decade. We are eager to put this funding to work to improve our nation's security and encourage Congress to continue to support investments in the high-priority border wall system. In addition to our border security mission, CBP plays a key role in our nation's immigration continuum. We look forward to working with Congress on the legislation needed to enhance the security of our nation, ensure effective immigration enforcement, and protect American workers and taxpayers. These legislative needs have a direct impact on CBP's ability to perform our mission. In accordance with the Department of Justice Zero Tolerance policy, Department of Homeland Security Secretary Nielsen has directed CBP to refer all illegal border crossers for criminal prosecution. CBP will enforce immigration laws set forth by Congress. No classes or categories of aliens are exempt from enforcement. The number of individuals apprehended while trying to enter the country illegally in between the established POEs and those presenting themselves without entry documentation along our southern border increased by 40% from February to March 2018. When compared to March 2017, the increase is an extraordinary 203%. The effort and hours used to detain, process, care for, hold UACs and family units distracts our law enforcement officer deployments, shrinks our capability to control the border, and make the arrest of smugglers and drug traffickers and criminals much more difficult. To enhance CBP's capability in southwest border sectors, the Department of Defense, in conjunction with border state governors, has begun deploying the National Guard to assist in stopping the flow of deadly drugs, other contraband, gang members, criminals, and illegal aliens into the country. Initial forces are already on the ground assisting CBP. We are working with DHS headquarters and DOD to ensure a seamless coordination of effort. With the support of Congress and in close coordination with our partners, CBP will continue to secure our nation's borders through a risk-based deployment of infrastructure, personnel, and technology. We offer every assistance working with Congress on the legislative changes that will help fulfill our missions. I want to take a moment to thank and recognize the men and women of CBP. They vigilantly carry out their border protection responsibilities professionally and with an integrity deserving of the public's trust. I will work to ensure my representation of them matches their dedication and commitment and the sacrifices that they and their families make in service to this country. Last Wednesday, during National Police Week, we added 3 more names to the CBP Valor Memorial and did our best to demonstrate to their surviving families and our returning families that we will never forget their loved one. We will always preserve their memories and honor the heroic work they did while protecting us all. Chairwoman McSally, Ranking Member Vela, and members of the subcommittee, I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Director Holman for 5 minutes.
Chairwoman McSally, Ranking Member Vela, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear here today and speak to the importance of ICE's mission to protect America from cross-border crime and illegal immigration, both of which threaten national security and public safety. Since President Trump's executive orders were issued early last year, ICE and its partner agencies have made significant progress in restoring the rule of law to our immigration system. Over the last fiscal year, ICE has increased arrests by over 40%, increased interior removals by 30%, and we have nearly doubled the number of MS-13 arrests over this year. Reflecting our continued focus on enforcement against public safety and national security threats, illegal reentrants, and fugitives, 92% of all of our arrests last year reflected one of these priorities. These results reflect what the dedicated men and women of ICE can achieve when they're empowered to fulfill their lawful mission. But the reality is that we will not stop illegal immigration unless we eliminate the pull factors, and we need Congress's help to do that. Last fall, the Trump administration sent a series
The gentleman suspend for a minute. The chair wishes to remind our guests today that demonstrations from the audience, including the use of signs, placards, and T-shirts, as well as verbal outbursts, are a violation of the rules of the House. The chair wishes to thank our guests for their cooperation in maintaining order and proper decorum.
Last fall, the Trump administration sent a series of policy priorities to Congress that would address the misguided policies and loopholes that only serve as pull factors for illegal immigration. These priorities reflect the input of law enforcement professionals and us 3 at the table, who know best.
The gentleman please suspend. Pursuant to my previous statement, would our guests please lower their signs in accordance with House rules? The chair instructs the Capitol Police to remove the protesters from the committee room. The committee will recess until order is restored, pending the call of the chair. Committee will come to order. Director Holman, please continue.
Do you want me to start, or you want me to start where I ended, ma'am?
You can start where you left off.
Okay. Last fall, the Trump administration sent a series of policy priorities to Congress that would address misguided policies and loopholes that only serve as pull factors for illegal immigration. These priorities reflect the input of law enforcement professionals who know best what we need in order to close the loopholes and eliminate the magnets for illegal immigration. Us three at the table actually authored much of what was sent up to the Hill. This administration rightfully listened to us. I know that many of you agree it's time that Congress do the same. Entering this country illegally is a crime. If there are no consequences for sneaking past the border, overstaying a visa, skipping immigration court, or even committing crimes while in the country illegally, then there's going to be no integrity in the entire system. One major pull factor we need to address is the policies governing the processing of unaccompanied alien children, we call UACs, and family units, and the legal constraints that impede their removal from the country. These policies ultimately encourage more parents to subject themselves and their children to dangerous criminal smuggling organizations, and we unfortunately have seen that reflected in the recent uptick in border apprehensions of UACs and family units. Since the Flores decision, ICE has been severely constrained in the way we can process and detain minors, as a result, family units. So we are often forced to release them, which all but guarantees they will skip their court dates or not abide by the court's decisions and not be sent home. This is highlighted by the fact that 3.4%, only 3.4% of all UACs from countries other than Mexico encountered at the southwest border have been removed. While ICE and our interagency partners have made progress this past year on reducing the number of countries who refuse to take their citizens back, we also need a solution that will allow us to detain dangerous criminals whose home countries won't take them back. As a result of a 2001 Supreme Court decision, Zabidas versus Davis, even illegal immigrants who are violent criminals can be released from our custody and back into the community if their home country won't take them back. That loophole can have tragic consequences, and we need Congress to help us. We also need to address the dangers posed by sanctuary jurisdictions that needlessly risk innocent lives to protect criminals who are illegally present in the United States. Sanctuary policies are shielding criminal aliens and immigration violators from enforcement by refusing to honor ICE detainers or allow ICE access to their jails. For those who claim they want ICE to focus solely on arresting, detaining, and removing criminals, it defies common sense to prevent us from taking custody of them in local jails and prisons. But that is exactly what's happening in sanctuary cities. To be clear, ICE is not asking law enforcement to do our job. What we want is access to a jail to talk to somebody that we know is here illegally in violation of federal law, that committed yet another crime, and it's incredibly frustrating. As a result of these policies, my officers are forced to make more arrests out in the community, at homes and workplaces. Those arrests are riskier for both the public and for law enforcement, and they increase the likelihood that ICE will encounter other illegal aliens who previously weren't on our radar. In other words, policies aimed at restricting or minimizing ICE's direct engagement in the community is actually having the opposite effect by forcing ICE to increase its presence in those very same communities. These policies also undermine cooperation and partnership between federal, state, and local law enforcement, which should be working together to uphold our shared priority of protecting the public safety. I'm encouraged that many of our law enforcement partners throughout the United States have expressed their opposition to these types of policies and continue to find ways to work with us. I want to make sure everyone here today understands that sanctuary cities do not protect the immigrant community. They do not make the community safer. They do the exact opposite. Finally, it is my hope that Congress will support the administration's request for more ICE personnel and resources so that we can continue the progress we made over the past year within existing resources. These issues aren't just about enforcing the law. They're also humanitarian issues because we know the journey to the U.S. can often be dangerous and deadly. And unless Congress works with us to address these concerns, we're going to see more caravans, more people making that dangerous journey north, more people will die entering this country. I've said it many times, there's a right way to come to this country and a wrong way. It's ICE's job to make sure that those who choose to come into the United States illegally are found, arrested, and if ordered by the immigration judge, removed. That's the oath I have taken, along with the other 20,000 law enforcement officers in ICE, who are constantly attacked simply for doing their congressionally mandated jobs. In closing, as you know, I'll be retiring from federal service next month after 34 years as a federal law enforcement officer. It's been the honor of my life to lead this agency and the 20,000 men that work in this agency. They're American patriots by the very fact they leave their homes every day and put their safety at risk to protect their communities. I will continue to be a strong advocate for the workforce and for the ICE mission, and I urge Congress to work with ICE and the administration on the issues I've highlighted here today. I want to thank you again for giving me this opportunity to testify and look forward to answering any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Homan. The chair now recognizes Director Sisna for 5 minutes.
Chairwoman McSally, Ranking Member Vela, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, I'm pleased to be here today along with my colleagues from ICE and CBP to offer thoughts on real border security. In most people's minds, border security means physical controls and surveillance. We have all seen the wall prototypes, the documentaries that follow Border Patrol agents as they do their dangerous and exhausting work, and other evidence of the physical aspects of border control. I suggest that true border security is much more than that. While border security certainly does incorporate physical control of the border, it must also incorporate the administrative processes that govern the entry and exit of individuals into the United States. Behind the border wall, as both the chairman and the chairwoman have said, there must be a wall of law. As evidence that many in Congress understand this problem, I point to H.R. 4760, the Securing America's Future Act, as a blueprint for meaningful immigration reform. And I note that the chairwoman, along with Congressman Smith, Barletta, Rutherford, and Bacon on this subcommittee, and indeed Chairman McCall himself, are all co-sponsors of that bill. This piece of legislation provides many of the tools that can help us regain control of our borders while at the same time improving our ability to administer an immigration system that is responsive to our nation's needs and obligations. Now, I would like to mention the backlog in the USCIS asylum caseload. The number of new asylum filings has tripled between FY14 and FY17. The number received in FY17 was the highest annual number of asylum claims received in over 20 years. USCIS currently faces an asylum backlog of around 318,000 cases, a backlog of critical proportions that cripples our ability to properly screen and vet applicants while they wait for a decision. A consequence of this 1,750% increase in pending asylum applications is that true asylum seekers are lost in a haystack of applications, many of them non-meritorious. In my written testimony, I discuss how USCIS has taken steps to address this backlog. I also mentioned several loopholes that work to undermine our nation's asylum system. Now, I would like to share with you some background on this. When Congress established the expedited removal process in 1996, Congress understood that a mechanism to screen for claims for asylum was necessary. The compromise Congress came up with was the so-called credible fear process. I would submit to you that the present process at the border is neither expeditious nor credible. The statutory standard for credible fear screenings at the border has been set so low that nearly everyone meets it. But over the years, since the passage of the Refugee Act of 1980, certain courts have taken this generous approach and stretched it almost beyond recognition, ruling that people like former gang members or victims of general gang violence may qualify for asylum as a member of some sort of particular social group. Someone only has to show that there is a, quote, reasonable possibility, unquote, of suffering persecution on account of a protected ground in order to qualify for asylum. The credible fear screening standard used at the border only requires that someone establish that there is a significant possibility of establishing eligibility for asylum in order to pass the screening process. What does this all mean? It means that an alien saying the magic word asylum at the border only has to establish a significant possibility that there is a reasonable possibility that he or she will be persecuted on account of a protected ground if returned home in order to be screened in. In other words, they need only show a possibility of a possibility. Many of those seeking to enter this country illegally and the smuggling organizations who profit from them know that a few key words are all it takes to get an alien through this screening process. It should be no surprise, therefore, that we have seen a 1,750% increase in the number of fear claims being made in the expedited removal process between FY08 and FY16. The loophole of this overly generous screening standard, when paired with insufficient funding for detention space, court decisions that prevent us from detaining fear claimants throughout the process of adjudicating their protection claims, and an overburdened immigration court system tasked with hearing those claims, is the recipe for the challenges that we are dealing with at the border. The evidence that the present system is being gamed is obvious. According to data from the Department of Justice, Executive Office for Immigration Review, through mid-January of this year, 56% of pending cases they have that originated from credible fear reviews that were conducted by USCIS still had not filed asylum applications. The number of removal orders issued after the alien failed to appear at the hearing on cases that originated from credible fear has increased by over 1,350%. Finally, as announced by EOIR last week, the approval rate for defensive asylum cases was only 20% and is only 22% for the first 2 quarters of FY18. Secretary Nielsen has called on Congress to work with her to quickly pass legislation to close these legal loopholes, and the asylum loophole, the loopholes and abuse of the asylum process I just described are some of them. These are being exploited to the detriment of the integrity of our immigration system. Like Secretary Nielsen, I stand ready to work with any member of Congress who seeks to support DHS's mission, secure our country, and correct these problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Cisna. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. Okay, so I just want to summarize the big picture here. We've heard a lot of numbers, we've heard a lot of information, a lot of data. So we've seen a 1,750% increase, Director Cisna, between FY08 and FY16, you said, in asylum claims, correct? 1,750%. That's a big number.
Yes.
There's a lot of violence around the world. There's a lot of poverty around the world. There's a lot of tribulation and troubles from individuals around the world. But this increase has gone up 1,750%. So the cartels and the individuals have figured out they simply have to say, I have a credible fear, or I want to seek asylum. And the bar is so low, it's a possibility of a possibility. 90% are released into the interior of the United States?
So the numbers are pretty bad. I mean, right now, credible fear screening rate, people who get positive credible fear screenings last year was 76%.
Okay, 76.
But the immigration courts might flip a few more digits beyond that, so say it's like around 80%.
Okay.
And of that number that get through, the ones that when their asylum claims are heard, about right now between 22, 25%, something like that, are actually granted asylum.
Okay, so again,
delta.
paint the picture. Most of them say the right words, right? And then how many years later do they get a court date on average?
It could be several years.
Okay. What percent actually show up?
Well, the numbers that we have show that something like 50%, I think, never even file an asylum claim.
Okay.
And in absentia orders, I don't have that readily available.
More than half,
yeah,
right? Director Holman?
A high percentage don't
Yeah.
show up. Yeah.
Yeah, I looked at those numbers this morning. With family units, UACs,
Yeah.
approximately 80% are absentia orders issued by the Immigration Court, which means 80% don't show up in court.
So I'm just trying to paint the picture here. Significant numbers are coming in. They're saying the right words because the bar is so low. They're then released into the interior of the United States with a court date years in the future. The vast majority don't show up for that court date. And for those who do, only 20%, a little over 20% are actually granted asylum.
Yes.
So, I mean, our system is being used for people to be able to just drive a Mack truck through those loopholes.
I think the problem goes back, as I said in my oral statement, to the very beginning of this process. The whole idea of the credible fear system was to give some protection to people who had legitimate fear of persecution in their home countries when they were at the border so that they wouldn't be expeditiously removed with everybody else. But the reality is that the number of people coming to the border seeking this type of protection and making these types of claims is greatly overwhelming our ability to hold them throughout the process. And if you can't hold them, you have to let them go. And if you let them go, you end up with the problem.
Right, and just for everybody's understanding, I mean, the asylum claim, the asylum law is very specific that you personally are going to be persecuted because of your race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. You personally, when you go back to that country, not that your country's in poverty, not that your country has violence in general. I just want to allow you to elaborate on that.
That's correct. You have to demonstrate that you have fear of persecution, that there's, at the credible fear stage, that there's a significant possibility that you will be persecuted on those grounds. As I said in my oral remarks, the courts have stretched those grounds a lot in the decades since, and the basis for asylum into our country is very generous. The credible fear standard is even more so.
So, Director Cisna, if you are fleeing from a country because of this persecution in one of these 5 categories and your life is in danger, as soon as you step foot into another country, say Mexico, wouldn't that be a safe place for you to settle?
Well, what I and Secretary Nielsen and others have been saying for a while now is that people who are fleeing persecution in their country should seek refuge in the first safe country
Exactly.
they come to. And that's the basic point, yes.
Thank you. Exactly. That's the whole point. If you really are legitimately fleeing because you're personally being persecuted, then as soon as you are in a safe country, you should be processed there. Can you share like what Mexico is or is not doing related to this and increased in partnership on this topic?
Well, for the past several years, Mexico does have an asylum system. It does have a working asylum system. And we at USCIS have for several years now sent people to Mexico to help them build their capacity to expand and improve their asylum processes. And we continue to do that. We continue to have discussions with them about that. People do ask for asylum and receive asylum in Mexico. And as I say, we at CIS are helping them to the degree they want and need help from us to accomplish that better.
Okay, great. I'm out of time. I'm going to come back in another round, though. The chair now recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Vela.
Thank you, Chairwoman McSally. Commissioner Vitello, family separation is very concerning to me, and with this new zero tolerance program announced by the Attorney General, can you please explain the criteria CBP personnel are supposed to use to verify family relationships?
Essentially, the agents and officers use whatever information is available to establish familial relationships. Sometimes these people have documents, sometimes they don't. When it's in question, when we don't believe that there is a familial relationship when a minor is involved, we'll refer that minor to HHS as an unaccompanied minor. As it relates to day-to-day operations, there's typically their statements along with documentation, and our officers and agents work to verify that. And when we can't, then we let HHS sort the individual as an unaccompanied minor.
Now, I don't know if you can answer this question because this actually may be a question best suited for CBPOs, but is the process different for families who present themselves at the ports of entry versus those that are apprehended by Border Patrol between the ports of entry?
Between the ports, we're now referring anybody that crosses the border illegally. So Border Patrol is referring 100% of the people that cross the border illegally to the Justice Department for criminal prosecution. At the ports, that's not an illegal act if they come under the same conditions. But the verification of family relationships is essentially the same in both instances.
So with this new policy in place, at the point that you're in a situation where you decide to separate the families, where do the minors go?
The decision is to prosecute at 100%. If that happens to be a family member, then the HHS would then take care of the minor as an unaccompanied child.
But can you tell us, because over the past couple of weeks, we've seen reports of families that have been separated, but nobody can tell us where those children are going. Do you know where they're going?
They're referred to Health and Human Services to be placed in a shelter.
So you're telling me that I'm better off asking HHS, or?
Well, yeah, they control the system as it relates to where the shelters are and which ones they send them to, et cetera. And it's their work that will reunite families or place them with a guardian.
This is probably a question for you, Director Cisna. Yesterday, the Department of Justice announced that it was asking the Department of Defense to send 21 prosecutors to assist in the prosecution of people detained pursuant to the new zero-tolerance policy. And within a few short weeks, federal courts along the southern border are now experiencing tremendous backlogs because of this. Border Patrol agents and customs officials do not appear to have the personnel and/or resources necessary to process the new detainees, including minors, and there also appears to be an issue with the lack of space necessary to house all of these defendants sentenced to serve time. What is the administration doing to address these concerns?
I think that's probably better for ICE on the detention issue.
As far as the detention capacity, we're well aware of that. We're working with the U.S. Marshals and DOJ on identifying available detention space. I got my staff working on that along with the department and DOJ. So I think it'll be addressed. We want to make sure we don't get back to catch and release. So we're identifying available beds throughout the country that we can use. As far as the question on HHS, under the Homeland Security Act 2002, we're required, both the Border Patrol and ICE, to release unaccompanied children to HHS within 72 hours. So we simply, once they identify within that 72 hours a bed someplace in the country, our job is to get that child to that bed. And HHS is their responsibility to reunite that child sometime with a parent and make sure that child gets released to a sponsor after being vetted.
3 years ago, most of us that are here lived through the issue with unaccompanied minors coming into this country. And to me, I just find it ironic that with the new zero tolerance policy, what we're essentially doing is creating a new class of unaccompanied minors. And I'll save the rest of my questions when we come back. I would, although we may not see eye to eye on a lot of these things, Director Homan, I'd like to congratulate you on your retirement and thank you for your service as well.
Thank you. And as far as your question or your comment, if they show up at a port of entry and make their asylum claims, they won't be prosecuted and they won't be separated. The department has no policy just to separate families for a deterrence issue. I mean, they're separating families for two reasons. Number one, they can't prove the relationship, and we've had many cases where children have been trafficked by people that weren't their parents. And we're concerned about the child. The other issues are when they're prosecuted, then they're separated.
So I just thank you for clarifying that, sir. Are you saying that with the new zero tolerance policy, that at the ports of entry, that children are not being separated from parents seeking asylum?
Not 100%. What I'm saying is we separate children from parents on two situations. Number one, they don't have evidence that they're actually a parent or legal guardian. And as I said, we've had cases where children were trafficked by people claiming to be parents but weren't. So we want to protect those children. The second issue, if the parent is prosecuted, then we have to separate them because the parent goes to U.S. Marshals and we have to go. The children go to HHS. So it's not a policy based on deterrence. It's a policy based on these two issues: prosecution and can establish a relationship.
And I'll just add, if they choose to use the port of entry, then their prosecution, that's not against the law, so prosecution won't be contemplated in those cases.
Okay, well, I'm out of time.
Thanks.
I yield back.
The chair now recognizes the chairman of the full committee, Mr. McCall from Texas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Director Homan, let me thank you for your many years of stellar service to our nation. We all congratulate you on your retirement and look forward to working with you in the future. When you talked about sanctuary cities, it just reminded me when I was a young counterterrorism federal prosecutor after 9/11, working with the Joint Terrorism Task Forces. And a lot of times we couldn't prove material support to a terrorist. So what we would do in many cases was we were able to get them on an immigration violation and deport them from this country. What I worry about what's happening in California, and I wrote an article that California is building the wrong wall, is that they're building a wall between federal law enforcement and local law enforcement. The idea that we would defy an ICE detainer because this is a criminal alien, and yet the state has decided we're going to defy federal law enforcement. To me, I think the supremacy clause applies, and eventually we're going to win this in the courts. But what can you tell me about the danger, not only to your agents that have to chase these people in the streets, but the danger from a counterterrorism standpoint?
Well, there's two issues here, and we always get wrapped around the immigration issue, right? That a local state agency has chosen to arrest somebody, take their freedom away, and lock them in a jail cell. And if we know they're here illegally based on some fingerprint submissions, we should have access to that person so we can enforce our law. They've already chosen to arrest them, so apparently they think they're a flight risk or public safety threat because they locked them in a jail cell. We should have access to that jail like every other federal agency does. DEA, FBI, they all get access. ICE should be no different. So I agree 100% on that. The other issue that's not talked about so much is how does the sanctuary cities affect criminal investigations, terrorism investigations. We've had law enforcement agencies that have left the JTTFs because we have HSI agents who work for ICE sitting on that task force.
Right.
We, as part of the California sanctuary law, we have lost our access to the Cal Gangs database. It's a California state database that has all this information on gang members, including MS-13 and numerous gangs. We can no longer access that database because of these laws. So it affects greatly national security and public safety and the criminal investigative aspect of that. You've had cities out there that passed policies in their city. They're not allowed to assist ICE in any way whatsoever.
And I think that's a point we need to be making as well as the Kate Steinle incident, but I think murder, but we should also be talking about the national security. I've got a map I want to point out that I thought was going to be up on the board. It has to do with special interest alien pathways into the United States. This was given to me, I think, from your agency, Director Homan. This is, DHS was created as a counterterrorism department. This is what keeps me up at night, is when you look at special interest aliens coming from Pakistan, from Turkey, from Syria, from Iraq, from Moscow to Africa into the Western Hemisphere with flights on air, sea, and land, and then the pathway up into the United States. We know that it's in the thousands of these special interest aliens try to make it per year. This is why I think closing the legal loopholes is so important, because it does no good if they get in and you can't deport them. It does no good if you can't prevent them from coming in the first place. There's also a program I wanted you to talk about, because I'd like this committee to authorize this program for you, sir, is the bitmap program, which deals with biometrics and deals with how can we track these individuals that make this journey from very dangerous countries of origin into this hemisphere, and particularly into the United States.
Well, I agree with you on this chart. That's the issue, right? If we learned anything from 9/11 Commission, law enforcement needs to be talking together, coordinating, sharing information. These sanctuary city laws prevent that from happening. So 100% agree with you. I'm glad you brought up. It is not just an immigration issue. It's a public safety, national security issue. As far as these illicit pathways, that's the reason, as you know, after 9/11, you're exactly right. Immigration authorities got most of the people that are involved with terrorist activities arrested because the FBI are still working on a case for that. As far as bitmap, we are working with our attaché offices overseas in Central America and South America on identifying those that are en route to the United States, many known terrorists, that these other countries will enroll them in the bitmap, take some prints, feeds into our system along with the DOD, and gives us a shot of who's coming, who's on their way. And Panama's been very successful. Panama has a great program down there. People that were known terrorists have been turned around in Panama and sent back before reaching our shores. I like to use then Secretary John Kelly said, we'd rather play the away game than play the home game. So we want to expand bitmap, and it's very important that we expand that to other parts of the country. It has already proven successful. It is already proven people that want to do harm to this country have been stopped on their way rather than at the border or inside the United States. So a significant investment needs to be made there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And Madam Chair, I look forward to working with you on authorizing this important program. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The full committee chairman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Correa from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank our guests today for the good work you're doing for this country. Thank you very much. I wanted to focus also a little bit on the big picture. We talked about a 300% increase, referring to what? The chairperson referred to 300% increase in what kind of crossings?
In the family units and unaccompanied children?
What were the actual numbers?
I can get that to you. I probably have it here, but with about 240,000 apprehensions so far this year. About a third of those would be people not from Mexico who are unaccompanied children or part of a family unit.
And we talked about 1,750% increase. Was that fiscal year 08 to 16? Did I get that correct?
There are two increases that are about 1,750%. One was in the number of pending asylum cases over the past 5 years.
Over the 5 years, not 1 year, 5 years.
5 years, yeah. And then the other one was the number of
What were the actual numbers on that?
So I have that. Let's see.
If you get that,
Yeah,
while
I-
you're getting that to
yeah,
me, I got another
yeah.
question. We talk about cartels when we're talking about these folks coming over looking for asylum. Are there cartels sending them over with drugs? When they get to the border, do these folks looking for refugee status, are they coming in with drugs? So they check in to say, I want asylum. By the way, they have a backpack full of drugs. Is that what happens?
I'm not sure we see that very often. I think that's more of a rare occurrence, but I can tell you that most,
Does it happen
if not all,
1% of the time, a couple of times, 30% of the time?
I would just say that most everyone that is in this situation is being smuggled, and the way that the
So you don't have
hierarchy
actual numbers?
works-
You don't have actual numbers? I'd like to get some of those from you. I'm sorry, I got just a couple of minutes left here. The other question is, you talk about a caravan, 1,000, 1,500, the left for the U.S. How many of those actually made it to the border, to the U.S. border? It sounds like you don't have that number either, but I hear it's about 300. And what I'd love to do, and I'll put in a question for you that I want to see what Mexico is doing, because my understanding is there is a major effort at the southern border of Mexico to address this issue, and that they are doing quite a bit in cooperating with the U.S. It's something that I don't have at my fingertips, and it appears that you don't either, so I'd love to get an answer to that.
Actually,
And finally, Mr. Homeland, if I can, I don't want to put any words in your mouth, but you said illegal immigrants are dangerous?
I don't believe I used those words, no.
I'm sorry?
I did not say that. At least I
Okay.
don't think I did.
Again, because the issue I'm having in my state of California is I got my farmers asking for more workers. And they've actually called me from the Republican areas saying, Lou, we need more workers on our fields. And I've told them, call the administration. I can't do anything. But, as you know, ag is one of our top industry, not only in California, but in southern states. And it appears that we need those farm hands. So that's what I'm saying. We're not thinking of these folks as terrorists, are we? Or
No,
dangerous?
No. What the statement I made, momentary statement, is entering this country illegally is a crime. It's a violation of federal law.
But yet they're needed at these farms as farm workers, correct?
Then I think it's up to Congress to make some changes in the guest worker program, whatever you think you need, but violating the laws of this country isn't the answer.
But yet they're needed, and the pull is economic. If I can, let me talk to you about another kind of political refugee, asylum seeker, which those are the folks that have a lot of money and they're transferring their money into the United States. $500,000 gets you what kind of a visa?
It's the EB-5 program.
Those people are also fearing for their economic lives in some of these countries, correct?
Perhaps.
Possibly from China and some of the others. So do we look at those as welcome or not welcome, and what's the distinction?
Well, the EB-5 program is a program established by Congress.
They're following the law just like these asylum seekers. Correct?
Yeah,
Under
yes.
existing laws.
Yeah, under existing laws, there is an asylum program and there's an EB-5.
Are these asylum seekers just from Central America, or they come from all over the world?
Asylum seekers come from everywhere.
Any other specific areas? Syria, Iraq?
Sure, Syria, China is Venezuela.
China? There's no war in China. What's the issue there?
There could be political persecution. It used to be, you could be a member of the Falun Gong. Previously, it was the one-child policy that drove a lot of refugees from China.
Again, Jim, I thank you for the great job you've done. I'll follow up with some questions later on with you. And, Madam Chair, I yield.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Bacon from Nebraska for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today and sharing your expertise. I think you've made a compelling case that our policies and loopholes undermine our security, undermine our law, and we need to get that fixed. We can have the best physical security in place, but if we're doing catch and release, or if we have an asylum policy that's being used as a loophole, we undermine all those efforts. And so I, for one, support more physical security, but I know we got to fix these laws so that they support each other. and that they defend our border and give us the rule of law. We want legal immigration, not illegal immigration. But I want to piggyback on what the chairman of our committee brought up, and it's the special interest alien pathways to the U.S. I think this is an area that does not get the visibility that it should get. We know that folks are coming here through pathways through South and Central America, but they're originating from the Middle East. Some perhaps are looking for asylum, but some are coming here for nefarious reasons, suspected Sunni terrorists. And we had the Homeland Security Secretary here this past month. I asked her about it. I said, what at the unclassified level can you tell us about this? And she made the statement at the unclassified level that we are tracking roughly 15 suspected terrorists a day somewhere in transit coming here. I think the American people need to know this. We're not doing a good enough job about that. So is there anything you can add at the unclassified level about suspected terrorists using these pathways and trying to abuse these policies to come to our country?
Well, the Secretary's right. Like I said, the bitmap program has already identified those who want to do harm to this country on their travel here. This is the whole issue about the southern border and the president wanting the wall and having a true border security. The question from the gentleman from California was, criminal cartels move product. They don't care if it's just an illegal alien looking for farm work, whether it's drugs, whether it's weapons, or whether it's a terrorist. They're in the business of moving product into the United States illegally, and that's how they make their money. So when you talk about sanctuary cities that dangle that carrot out, that you get to this city and you'll be you can even commit a crime, you'll be protected. We're bankrolling these very criminal organizations that have murdered Border Patrol agents, murdered my agents, smuggled guns, smuggled weapons, and can smuggle terrorists. It's the same illicit pathways. That's why when we talk about border security and border wall and closing these loopholes, that's why it's so important. It's, as I said earlier, it's just not an immigration issue. It's a national security issue because the people that want to do harm to this country are going to use those same pathways that are being bankrolled by a lack of a strong policy.
Okay, given what the Homeland Security Secretary said, let me just ask point blank. Have we caught suspected terrorists trying to enter our country through these pathways?
Well, the detail she gives you is a recognition that when someone applies for entry or is encountered by one of our officers, they are they're hitting on the database that the government keeps of known and suspected terrorists. So that's happening regularly.
So the answer is yes. We have caught
known or suspected
or interdicted known or suspected terrorists coming here. And I think we do too often put this as an immigration issue, which clouds the more fundamental issue of border security and terrorism. And I think, and I guess I'll close with just this thought. Why aren't we doing a better job as Homeland Security or in your areas of communicating this? Because I feel like it seems to be lost. I think if the American people knew of the magnitude of terrorists from the Middle East trying to come through our southern border using these alien pathways to the U.S. that in this handout, it would change the discussion. It would raise the support levels for what we're trying to do to improve our physical security and policies. And I think the debate becomes easy when we can show that there's an actual physical terrorist threat trying to come here. I just don't know that we're making that case. Could we do better, or am I off base on this?
I can tell you we're trying. But, you know, there's a vast amount of the media that don't want to report it. They want to make us the case against the administration. They want to make us about, you know, immigrant families trying to better. I can't blame anybody for wanting to be part of the greatest country on earth, but there's a right way to do it. But we are telling the story. The problem is that story doesn't get past. The wall's been put up by NGOs and these groups that don't want the American people to hear the truth. That's why I'm out a lot trying to talk. I know Ron's out talking a lot. We're trying to get that story out there. This is more than just immigration. We're talking about our country's sovereignty. We're talking about national security of this country.
I think some folks perceive this as a hypothetical issue versus a real issue. And I think the more real we make it with tangible names, tangible pictures of faces of folks who come here who had terrorist designs in our country, I think this debate gets easier. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Ms. Barragan from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm going to go ahead and my colleague just said he wanted to make this more real. I want to introduce into the record a statement by Olivia Caceres, a mother who participated in a caravan during the fall of 2017, into the record. She's from may I go into the record?
Without objection.
So Olivia's from El Salvador, one of the deadliest countries that's not in a war zone, and she talks about how difficult it is to turn yourself in. She talks about what it's like to be intimidated by agents and being separated from her child. For 85 days, her 15-month-old baby had been separated, and her child was never the same and has come back. And those are real stories. That is what is happening. Now, we love to talk about this issue about the MS-13 gangs. We love to paint immigrants as criminals. That is not the complete facts. And that is very offensive for me to see continuing to happen, is continuing to message this anti-immigrant agenda. There are lots of good immigrants. And then I hear this rhetoric, more DACA-like people. Guess what? DACA-like people are the people we need in this country. They've served this country, they've gone to college, they produce, and they contribute to the economy. So to put them into the same category is completely offensive. Now, I happen to know about some of these people who come over and seek asylum. Why? Because I represented a family, an unaccompanied minor, when I was an attorney on a pro bono level, and I had to go find his mom, who was also in detention. Now, it is extremely hard to get asylum. It is very hard to get asylum. The standard is very hard, and it's very high. Now, I had unlimited resources at a big law firm. I could hire experts. And even then, I couldn't get asylum. Was it a fraud? No. Did she and they get protections? Yes, under a different category. It took years. But there are people who come to this country because they're fleeing the violence. In my particular case, they already killed one of her sons. Guess what? When one of your children is killed and you have one left, you are going to run. You are going to try to seek safe haven. And so it makes me sick to my stomach to keep hearing over and over again, painting the broad stroke and the picture as though these are folks who are coming here to do harm. And so, you know, it's just unbelievable to me how this rhetoric continues, and to see it continue in a campaign season just gets even worse and worse. And just because you don't get asylum doesn't mean that it's a fraud. And I think that's something that's just so important for me to state. Now, I want to move on to the issue of family separation. According to the New York Times, more than 700 children had to be taken from adults claiming to be their parents since October, including more than 100 children under the age of 4. Secretary Nielsen disputed this figure at a May 15th Senate Homeland hearing. She said that the 700 children figure was an HHS number and not a DHS figure. Does anybody on this panel know what the DHS figure is?
We can, for the record, get back to you with the actual number of people who were in CBP custody and was either unable to determine whether there was a familial relationship that we could prove and were comfortable with, or somebody was prosecuted under the having crossed the border illegally, and then that caused a family separation. We can get back to you and give you the exact number of that.
Okay, and let me tell you, it is hard for some of these families when they're fleeing violence and they're leaving their country. They're not exactly saying, oh, let me go look for documentation so that I can prove this is my child. I had a hard time in my own case having to find people there on the ground to get the documents that we needed to make a case, right? People are leaving because they're in distress, because they're facing violence and they're fearful, right? It's not generally something they're thinking about before they take off. How do I prove this is my child? I'll tell you right now, if I had to go find something to prove my relationship with my mother, it'd probably take me a little while. So I understand how difficult this is. Can you tell me how we are counting and tracking children that are separated from children?
So everybody that's taken into custody, it goes through the sort of a booking procedure, right? We get the biographical information, and so all of that is in the documentation systems at CBP. So that's how we try to establish whether they're related or not using those documents. That all becomes part of their record, because as they come in, that part of that processing is referring them for a removal hearing.
Great, thank you. I yield back.
Can I respond to the speech that was made?
Absolutely.
First of all, no one on this panel is anti-immigrant. We're law enforcement officers who enforce the law that you all enacted. So to sit there and say that we're anti-immigrant is just wrong. We are enforcing laws. If you think it's okay to enter this country legally and they shouldn't be arrested, that's just wrong. The laws clearly state enter the country legally is a crime. And no one's up here saying all illegal aliens are criminals. A certain percentage of them are criminals. They commit yet another offense after they're here. I have said many times, I certainly understand the plight of these people, and I feel bad for some of these people. But I have a job to do. I have to enforce law and uphold the oath that I took to enact the laws enacted by you, Congress.
Thank you, Director Coleman. General Leader's time has expired. The chair now recognizes Mr. Rogers from Alabama for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for your service to our country. I understand that, and y'all may have talked about this in your opening statement. I was a little bit late, and I apologize for that, that in March, nearly 1,500-person caravan, mostly Hondurans, started on a mission to make a 2,000-mile trek to our border that was organized by some sort of radical advocacy group. Is that accurate, the characterization of that caravan? And they came through Mexico to get to our southwest border, and under the pretense that they were in danger. Was there evidence that they were in danger once they were in Mexico that y'all are aware of? Do you know how many of that group made it to the port of San Ysidro?
Yes, my staff gave me the number. Congressman Correa had the same question. Our records indicate that we arrested, crossing illegally between the ports of entry, 122 people who claimed to be part of the caravan. And then 333 of them presented themselves at the port of entry and claimed asylum.
Do you know if any of those individuals in that caravan petitioned Mexico for asylum?
In discussions with Mexico, they did resettle some of the original group.
Do you know if any of that roughly 500 that you just described tried to stop and stay in Mexico?
I don't know.
Director Cessna, do you know how many of these immigrants have received an initial determination of credible fear in the United States?
Yes, USCIS received, referred to us from ICE so far, a total of 327 cases of people that we think were part of this so-called caravan. At least they self-identified, or we had evidence that they were. Of those 327, we have completed 216 of these credible fear screenings, and of that, 205 got positive screenings.
Amazing. Do you have any estimate, Mr. Botello, of how many immigrants in that caravan may have slipped through and are now in the country that we just don't have a handle on?
I don't know that number.
Okay. I know, but I'm sorry. Back in 2010, President Obama ordered the National Guard down to the border in a support capacity. Wasn't a whole lot said about it, but recently when President Trump did the same thing, there was a big fuss made about it. What exactly is the role of the National Guard when they're working at the border in concert with CBP?
Much like the previous deployments that we got great assistance from the National Guard, we're specifically asking for a number of things. The aviation support is some of the biggest percentage of what they will give us will be in that. There are also a number of roles in sector headquarters and at stations, helping us watch the screens that the camera feeds come into, the comm centers, helping us dispatch, and we're looking at other roles for them to play. But it's essentially that kind of support that allows us to then redeploy the agents that might have to do that work. So it gives us a bit more capacity in the locations where they're doing that work instead of Border Patrol agents.
Mr. Botello, do you believe that a physical border wall is effective in stemming the flow of illegal immigrants into our country?
It has been very effective, and we expect it to continue to be.
Do you believe that in addition to a physical wall, security systems that support that wall are effective in deterring illegal immigration into our country?
When the President directed us to make those plans, all of the estimates and all of the action planning that we've done is in fact that. It is a system that brings a number of capabilities. Impedance and denial by the wall itself, access and mobility, so roadways and avenues toward the border get there conveniently. a number of agents are part of the requests that we put forward. You have to have all three of those things, personnel, technology, and infrastructure, to make it successful.
At present, does CBP have the resources physically and financially to secure our southwest border?
Across the board, no, but we're using all of the money that the 2018 appropriation gave us to improve conditions as it relates to those three: personnel, technology, and infrastructure.
It seems to me that this caravan that got so much publicity was a manufactured event to try to exploit our southwest border. Would that be a fair characterization, given that those people for weeks were traveling, and once they were out of Honduras, seemed to be out of harm's way?
It does highlight the discussion about loopholes. These folks, you know, a number of them knew that when they made that claim for asylum that they were going to be released into the country.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Ms. Demings from Florida for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. It's good to see you again. Commissioner, I would like to address how unaccompanied minors, how they have reasonable fear interviews are conducted. As a former social worker, a former law enforcement officer, and a former crimes against children detective, I have seen children who experience confusion, fear. Sometimes they're even silent after experiencing trauma. I'm sure that we all here understand these challenges and want to make sure that CBP agents have training and the resources necessary to screen unaccompanied minors with the care and consideration that every child certainly deserves. What is the status of CBP's efforts to address and implement GAO's 2015 recommendations for Border Patrol agents and OFO officers to screen unaccompanied minors?
We've made a number of improvements since 2014 and have responded to GAO's requests and agreed with a lot of the findings. There's a number of training curricula out there for agents to use in the interview setting when they're with family units and unaccompanied minors. And so there's a online course that agents have to take that's mandatory. There's some specific training, and then the skills that agents use. So we try to make sure that the people who are doing that interview and that those processes are trained and have the heart to do it. Most of our workforce, all of our workforce speaks Spanish. More than half of them are native speakers, if you will. They're Latino or Hispanic people, and then a lot of them are families. So we understand, you know, from that human perspective, the situation that these children are in, and do everything we can to make them feel comfortable. And we've made a number of improvements in the enforcement systems to record when people are fed, when their interviews are taking place, whether they got a chance to, you know, how long they've been in our custody. So we've improved the systems and the accountability within the systems, and then invested in some facilities that are specifically designed for this population.
And since 2014, how would you critique the success of the training that you do have in place? How do you feel it's working, and what adjustments, if any, have you made since then?
We've gotten better, and the system adjustments and the things that we've done to make sure that those facilities, I mean, they're Border Patrol stations. It's where people are getting arrested and interviewed before they move on through the system. And so we've tried to understand that this population is a bit different than the larger population. I think we've done a good job in making those adjustments.
Okay, thank you. Director Homan, under what circumstances does ICE detain or otherwise assume custody of individuals apprehended at or near the southwest border? And if you talked about that earlier, I'm sorry I was late, so if you could just...
ICE is appropriated for the detention of those in the country illegally. So everybody that Border Patrol apprehends, if they do not immediately remove them, then we'll get custody of them and we'll detain them until they have the hearing.
Okay,
and that's on a case-by-case basis. We don't detain everybody. It's flight risk and danger to the community. If Border Patrol process them per expedited removal processing, they're mandatorily detained, so we'll detain them.
Okay, and under what circumstances does ICE refer individuals who are apprehended at or near the border to DOJ for prosecution?
Border Patrol does that as part of the zero tolerance. We will present people prosecutions if we criminally arrest somebody and charge them with a crime. We'll present them. But as far as the zero tolerance, Border Patrol is doing that work.
Okay, Did you want to add to that?
So based on the attempt to end catch and release, the Justice Department put out word through their system, and then the Secretary followed that up with direction to CBP to refer all border crossers in between the ports of entry. Anybody that enters the country illegally will be referred for prosecution.
Okay, thank you. Chairwoman, I yield back.
Someone yields back. And now we're going to start a second round here. Director Cisna, I want to go over the numbers again of the people in the caravan. You said 327 were referred for asylum processing, I think you said. 216 were screened, and 205 received a positive screening?
That's correct. So far.
So far?
Yeah, so there may be more cases coming,
Right.
but that's what we have so
So
far.
of the 216 screened, 94.9%, because of this very low bar of proving a possibility of a possibility, have made it through. Where are they right now? Have they been released into the interior of the United States?
I can't account for all of that. I would have to ask my colleague at ICE, but what I can say is that the issue here is once they're screened, once they have the credible fear screening and it's positive, of course, if it's negative, and there are a handful that were negative, they'll get removed if the IJ upholds the decision. But if it's positive, the idea is that they would be sent to an immigration judge who would then determine with finality whether they are going to get asylum or not. And if these are family units, as you may know, because of the Flores Settlement Agreement, we may have to release them within 20 days. There may not be enough time to get to the immigration judge before we have to let them go.
So that brings us to my next point. In your testimony, you talked about, which I totally support, last in, first out, because if you put them to the end of the line 2 years from now, you're just creating a whole other problem, which is inhumane in and of itself, as people are then settling down. So if you're doing the last in, first out, what's that time frame right now?
Well, the last in, first out refers to regular asylum applications. This is the 318,000 cases that we have here. But it's connected to the credible fear thing because of the surge in credible fear work, we've had to divert people from regular asylum work to do all this stuff at the border. And one of the results of that is that the backlog for regular asylum went up and up and up and up. So the only way that we can, one of the best ways we think to address that enormous multi-hundred thousand person backlog is to do last in, first out by concentrating on the most recent cases, weeding out quickly and deporting the people who don't merit the benefit, and then moving on to the other cases.
All right, well, please keep us posted on how these cases progress. I just want to make it clear again, you're doing everything you can with the administration in order to close these loopholes, but there are legal things that we have to do congressionally in order to help you. But just to be clear, 100% prosecution between the ports of entry, you're going to be prosecuted is the new policy. However, if you present yourself at a port of entry and say, I have a credible fear, you will have no prosecution, and these loopholes will apply. So why isn't everybody doing that? And this is not a commercial message to them to start doing that. It seems like the cartels are smart and the people are smart. They figure out how to take advantage of our loopholes. So why don't they just all line up at the ports of entry? And I'm very concerned with the backlog then with the legitimate traffic. And we've talked about the manning there being bogged down. And what the heck is preventing us from, I know they're on U.S. soil then, from sort of backing up and just working with Mexico and saying, turn around, you're in Mexico. If you have a credible fear, work with them.
We are in discussions for that exactly. Mexico has done some in this as it relates to the caravan. They do quite a bit for us on the southern border, but obviously there's a lot more to do. There's a lot more work to do on both sides. And so, yeah, we would prefer that people don't make the journey at all. But Safe Third is a way for this to get solved. And we think that
to clarify, you mean safe third country where they do their claims in Mexico?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And the 100% prosecution, that may drive more traffic to the port of entry, but it's a safer condition. They don't have to go into the hands of a smuggler to be in that situation. We think that's better for everyone.
Is there anything we can do, though, to put some staff sort of right at the actual international boundary and to work with Mexico right there so that we're not, like, having to process all of them without us passing an act of Congress?
So what we're trying to do now is regulate how many people come to the port and where they come. So we're in discussions with them. That is by national agreement. We have several agreements with Mexico on how to repatriate people and when people are refused at the port and those kind of things. So we're having those discussions with them now. Again, the bottom line is we really don't want people to make this journey.
Exactly. Director Cisna, two more questions. For those who are claiming a false asylum claim. You talk in your written testimony about how there's no teeth to that. So can you talk a little bit about that? And also, in your written testimony, you talk about how you're concerned about people filing now, realizing this loophole, and they've been in the interior of the United States now for maybe up to 10 years, but they're realizing if they say they have a credible fear, it gives them a work permit, and this is now a workaround for them to go from being illegal to being legal using this loophole.
Yes, there are many, many such loopholes. The one you just referred to is, this is for regular asylum cases. It is well known that if you file for asylum and 6 months go by and we haven't heard your case, you get a work permit. So a lot of people, we believe, do this on purpose because they know that the backlog is so huge that we'll never get to their case. They get a work permit and they can wander around working freely in the economy for as long as it takes to hear their case. Now, many of those people have legitimate claims, many don't. And the people who don't clog up the whole system for the people who do, making the granting of their correct benefit delayed.
So for those who don't have a legitimate claim, they've been in the country illegally for a long time. They've now identified a loophole. They can just apply, say they have a credible fear, apply, and within 6 months, they now have a legal work permit.
Yes, and some people, in fact, apply for asylum on purpose, knowing they don't have a good case, not because so much they want the EAD, the Employment Authorization Document, but because they intentionally want to get thrown into immigration court. And they want that because there's certain avenues of relief that you can get in immigration court that they think that they can get. One is called cancellation of removal. So they file these bogus claims on purpose intentionally to get into court, and that also clogs up our system. So we're wrestling with that as well, trying to get through those cases as quickly as we can.
Okay, and last, you went over, so I'm going to go over a little bit more, but just on the no teeth to the false asylum claims, can you just speak to that?
Well, if you file a false claim, usually the penalty is you receive a notice to appear in immigration court and you'll get deported. What we would like at DHS and what we've proposed is that there be more teeth, there be more penalties put onto fraudulent claims. And we also want the definition of what constitutes a fraudulent or frivolous claim. It doesn't necessarily have to be fraudulent, it's frivolous claim as well. If that were better defined, we could weed out with greater efficacy these bad cases that clog up the system for legitimate asylum seekers.
Thanks, and I just want to mention that tightening that up is in our bill, the Secure America's Future Act.
That's right.
If I can add to that, ma'am, one thing ICE is in the process of doing, we're going to step up our enforcement against family units that have final orders removal. They've had their due process, they've been order removed by the immigration judge. Of course, I expect a lot of letters saying why are we targeting families and not criminals, but if they're given their due process and a federal judge makes a decision, if we don't execute those decisions, there's no integrity in the system. So you're going to see a lot more enforcement here in the very near future on that.
Thanks. Chair now recognizes Mr. Vela for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and I ask for unanimous consent to enter statements from the Church World Service, Amnesty International, the National Immigration Forum, the American Immigration Council, and the National Domestic Workers Alliance into the record.
Without objection.
Commissioner Fratello, kind of as a follow-up to the question about the distinction in how people are treated at the ports of entry versus between the ports of entry, with the new zero-tolerance policy in place, if someone is apprehended between the ports of entry and claims credible fear, what happens to them?
Well, in the situation with zero tolerance, they'll be referred to the Justice Department for criminal prosecution for illegal entry. If they claim credible fear, that's a separate matter. So while they're in custody, they could have an interview by one of Francis's people, or once they're concluded with the U.S. Attorney and the Justice Department, that would be a separate matter for them.
Did you want to follow up?
Yeah. Just because you're being prosecuted under 8 U.S.C. 1325A doesn't mean that you can't also make an asylum claim. And if that happens, I think what we expect will happen, I don't think we've seen many cases where this has happened yet under the new zero-tolerance policy. That person would go through the prosecution process and then be sent back into ICE detention. At that point, then we at USCIS would interview them in the normal course for their credible fear screening. So they're not incompatible, the two processes.
Well, what I'm wondering about is, and you may be familiar with this, Article 31 of the Refugee Convention, right, which says that the contracting states, and the United States is one of those, shall not impose penalties on account of their illegal entry or presence on refugees who, coming directly from a territory where their life or freedom was threatened, in the sense of Article 1, enter or are present in their territory without authorization. So what's your take on the United States agreement back in 1968 as that would apply to these people that are crossing between ports of entry?
My understanding of the principal of the principal commitment that we made under the protocols to the convention actually are that we're not going to return people to a country where they may suffer persecution, and we're not doing that. If they make a legitimate claim to asylum, we'll hear it, and we'll do the credible fear screening, and they may in the end get asylum. But that doesn't mean that they didn't violate the law. That doesn't mean that they didn't violate 8 U.S.C. 1325A. And the law is the law. They should be prosecuted and punished for that. But that doesn't mean that they can't also get asylum. And we're not going to throw them back to a country where they can be persecuted if they have a legitimate asylum claim. And we would not be therefore be violating the protocol of the convention.
But to be clear, and we may agree or disagree as to whether this is the right thing to do or not, what is happening with these people who claim credible fear between ports of entry, they're being taken right into our criminal justice system, correct?
I believe so, yes, right.
Commissioner Vitello, on the issue of, we had some discussion about terrorists in the southern border. Last time I checked, we had encountered more terrorists on the northern border than on the southern border. Is that still true, or has that changed?
I'd have to look at the data. I think it's probably still true.
And you made some reference to the fact that some of the or a good portion of the personnel in Border Patrol are Spanish-speaking, right?
Correct. It's a requirement of the, it's a pass-fail requirement at the academy.
So you can understand the serious concern that some of us might have with the incident in Montana here over the weekend, right, where 2 American citizens were questioned about their citizenship just because they were speaking Spanish.
So I'm aware of that video. I did watch it on YouTube. I've looked at the full reporting from Havre sector. It happened in Havre, Montana. And just let me start out by saying that there is a policy in the federal government and law enforcement against racial profiling. The Secretary has a statement out on it, and CBP has its own policy statement that prohibits the racial profiling as a tactic used in law enforcement investigations or encounters. And we expect our people, whether they're arresting someone, whether they're interacting with the public, bad guy or good guy, they treat those people with professionalism, respect, and dignity. So, and we hold them to account for when they don't do that. In the case of Montana, we've asked our Office of Professional Responsibility to review the matter. And so I don't want to prejudge it. I want them to do all the fact-finding, and then I'm happy to come back and give you the full circumstance about what happened. But bottom line, we expect our people to act with professionalism, and when they don't, we're going to hold them account for that.
Thank you. I'll yield back.
Yields back. Chair now recognizes Mr. Correa from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just following up on those comments on racial profiling. State of California, Democrats and Republicans got together to pass laws against racial profiling. And I can tell you, in my life, taking a train from San Diego to Orange County, I have been profiled. I'll be me, nice Marine sitting right next to me. Guess who gets the question, are you an American citizen or not? You know, it's just something we live with, and, you know, I guess we got to live with it. Let me take a few moments to talk about big picture. Anybody here think MS-13 is good actors or bad actors? We all agree they're bad actors, for the record. Is there some of these folks coming from El Salvador, Guatemala, do you think they have a legitimate fear for their lives given that MS-13 is alive and well in those countries? The answer is probably yes. So my question is, this is a public policy hearing today, trying to iron out public policy. Is it the law or is it loopholes when it comes to refugees? If you get somebody who comes from El Salvador, do we want to change the law to say there should not be a loophole for those folks that have a reasonable, credible fear for their lives? I'm asking you, folks. Do you want to close that loophole?
We want to be in a situation in where people who cross the border illegally, if they have a legitimate refugee or asylum claim, that they're put into that system and allowed to do that. What's happening here now, or what's happening on the border now, is that people are making that claim, and they're not being held by ICE until their hearing, so their due process gets lost to their own effort because they don't show or
Streamline the process here. We talked a little while ago about our other partners, if I may call them partners, Mexico, in many ways, and I don't want to put any words into your folks' mouths here, but you said there was some cooperation with Mexico. I've talked to folks in your agency, and they tell me that there's a lot of cooperation with Mexico, and that the numbers of those folks coming across in those caravans were drastically reduced by the Mexicans, but they have their own laws that they've got to follow when it comes to humanitarian issues. So my question to you is, would you advocate a stronger cooperation with the Mexicans when it comes to our national security, including this issue of asylum seekers?
Yes, to be precise, we do have a very good working relationship with Mexico.
You're the expert, you policymakers. Do you have any suggestions how we can work with the Mexicans to make sure that, we make this hemisphere a little bit safer for everybody involved? I'm asking you as a policymaker. You're the expert. Give me some opinions.
So we're continuing the discussion on all elements of security as it relates to the hemisphere with Mexico. They're a strong partner, and in fact, they've helped us co-host binationally a conference on the Northern Triangle to help them understand what the governance challenges are, where the investments need to be made in that part of the world. And so Mexico's a great partner in that. But Safe Third is one of those things. A safe third country, Mexico, does have an asylum system. So if it can be strengthened.
So the majority of these folks in the caravan get turned back at the Mexican territory as opposed to reaching our border.
A number of them did get settled.
A majority, because if 1,000 to 1,500 started, and some of us here quoted that, and you said about 300 arrived at the border that we know of, it's more than half didn't get it to the U.S. border.
We encountered almost 500 of them, and I'm aware of the media reports and in direct discussion with Mexico that they settled a number of them.
But, sir, if I can add, we do need
we
do need to close loopholes. We need congressional action on making.
Is that loophole, sir, or is that changing the law to tighten up on who's a refugee or not?
Well, either or. You got.
Well, sir,
100% of the people are.
Sir,
that
you're
claim
here as a
fear.
policymaker advising us. Do you think the laws are too lax when it comes to whether you fear for your life or not, or is something else that you want to change in these loopholes?
Laws are too lax. There are loopholes we need to have addressed. What
would you tighten?
CIS
When you say it's too lax, what would you tighten?
85% and immigration court only approves 20%. There's something being lost here, and it's if only 20% are winning their claim in front of the immigration court, that shows there's a problem. There's an abuse of the system. Now, I certainly can say that. Do I think some of these people have a solid claim and they're escaping fear? Of course. But I also think many of them are taking advantage of a loophole in a small threshold. And what the problem with that, they're clogging up the system. So there's people in this world that really
then is it an
need our
issue of enough
protection
money
get
being
back
sent
in.
to the judicial branch so they can, speedily advocate on these claims?
I think it's both substance and process. If you changed nothing but changed the process, that would be a big help. If you kept the system as it was, but at least we could detain people until the full process of their asylum claim was heard.
So it's a process, not the loophole.
Well, that's one issue, is the process and resources to be able to hold people and, address the Flores settlement situation, address all his resources to hold people as long as it takes to hear their full asylum claim. The other issue is substance. What should be the credible fear standard? I know the Goodlatte bill has a provision in there that talks about divorcing the credibility assessment from the substantive assessment. That would be helpful if that happened. There are other people who would say that the basis of asylum itself may need to be reexamined. That's a separate issue as well.
Madam Chair, I yield.
The chair now recognizes Ms. Marigon from California for 5 minutes.
I heard the comment that the fact that only 20% qualify for asylum means that there's an abuse happening. One of the reasons it could be so low is because these people are not entitled to counsel. And as I mentioned, it is very hard to meet the legal requirements. You almost cannot increase the standard. It is already so high. I actually believe if we gave people counsel, you would see that 20% number increase, and by quite a bit. And so I'm not sure, I don't think the logic follows that because only 20% are granted asylum, therefore there's all these abuses. Having been in the system, having litigated asylum cases, I know firsthand how challenging it is, and I know the difference it makes when you do have counsel. Most people who don't have an extremely difficult time because it is so high. I want to go back to the issue of, I think, Mr. Cessna, that you had mentioned. How does USCIS determine a person's asylum claim is fraudulent? Like, how is that assessment made?
Well, the person could just be ineligible, flat out ineligible. That's different from being fraudulent. Both things are happening, and
yeah, I want to know about the fraudulent.
Right.
How do you guys determine if an asylum claim is fraudulent?
I think if the person says something that manifestly does not conform to the facts on the ground, we would determine that the person was lying and therefore made a fraudulent claim.
Do we have any numbers about how many were actually fraudulent under that definition you just explained?
No, we don't have any numbers on how many people are making fraudulent claims either in credible fear or in regular asylum yet, but we're working on that.
Do you have any numbers on how many asylum claims were denied by USCIS in recent years that have led to perjury charges?
No, I don't have that available.
Could you get those to me in writing?
Sure.
If you could, that would be great. I want to also touch upon the incident that occurred, the Montana incident. The CBP has about a 100-mile radius of jurisdiction where you can, engage with somebody, pull somebody over for reasonable suspicion of an immigration violation or crime. Is that correct, roughly?
Roughly, yes. The court, through case law, has given us jurisdiction to do a number of things near the immediate border, loosely defined at 100 miles.
And if you take a look at the map, like most of Los Angeles alone is in that because of the West being on the coast, correct?
I think that's true for a number of coastal states.
How often would you say a CBP officer is going to engage with somebody and start questioning them about their status just because they're speaking Spanish? How often do you think that's happening?
I don't think it happens very often at all. I think they're trained to do a number of things and look at a number of factors before they make an encounter, they make a stop for someone. In this case, it was roughly 40 miles or so from the border.
Okay, so should I advise my constituents that are within 40 miles of the border, they shouldn't be speaking Spanish anymore?
No, I wouldn't do that.
Okay, what advice could you give? Because look, I speak Spanish. It was my first language. It's actually an asset in this country to be able to speak two languages, especially Spanish. So there's a shortage of actually workers who employers seek to speak two languages, and Spanish is often one of them. I get questions now of, well, does this mean I shouldn't speak Spanish anymore? As somebody who's at CBP, what advice do you think I should give them?
I'm not sure. A number of social engagements. I've worked on the border for many years. I speak Spanish myself. It's not something that people should be concerned about if they're here illegally. And
in this case, the people actually showed ID, even though they didn't have to, and they were still detained for another 35 to 40 minutes. What is, in that case, what is somebody supposed to do? You've shown your ID, you're still being detained.
I would like for our Office of Professional Responsibility to do a complete review of the incident, and then I'm happy to come back or put in the record, if it's done by then, the total circumstance of that case.
Okay, if that happens to somebody, are they allowed to pull out their cell phone and just start documenting that they're being withheld for 35 to 40 minutes or whatever it is?
Our agents are regularly filmed in the performance of their duties, and CBP has made an investment in changing policy and allowing for us to use incident-driven video recording. So we're going to be investing in and deploying a number of cameras in the workspace. Some of those will be actually worn by agents.
And agents are not going to delete the videos, right?
there's a whole policy that surrounds how we use the video and how it's stored and collected and et cetera.
Great. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. In summary, as we wrap up, I want to thank the gentlemen for their testimony today and their service. We talked today about trying to build the policy wall in order to secure our country, secure our border, and stop having people take advantage of loopholes in the law. To summarize some of those loopholes that we have been working together with you to close, the first is to raise the standard of the initial asylum interview that happens at the border, which is so low that nearly everybody can make it through. The second is to hold individuals as long as it takes for them to have due process in order to process their claim. The third is to make it inadmissible in our country if you are a serious criminal or gang member or a terrorist, which I cannot believe isn't a part of the law, but we actually have to change that law. The fourth is to have a swift removal of you if you are denied in your claim. The fifth is to terminate your asylum if you were to get it, if you return back to your country without any material change in the conditions there. Clearly, if you're afraid for your life, but you go back to visit, then something's not right there. So your asylum should be considered for termination. The sixth is that there could be an expeditious return of unaccompanied minors to non-contiguous countries so that we can swiftly return them just like we can to Mexico. And the last is to increase the penalties for false asylum claims in order to deter and hold people accountable if they file for those. Is that a good summary of many of the loopholes we're talking about today?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Yes.
These all are in our bill, the Secure America's Future Act. These are common sense reforms that will keep our country safe and keep our community safe. And I just want to encourage, don't have any members left here, all members on both sides of the aisle, look at our bill, read our bill, study our bill, and if you have suggested improvements to our bill, then please bring them to us, and we will work with you in order to get the bill to a place that we can get 218 people to vote for it and get it out of the People's House, the House of Representatives. The time is urgent. As someone who represents a border community who is dealing with these public safety threats and national security threats on a daily basis in the communities that I represent, as you are all and your agents are out there every single day dealing with these threats, the time is urgent. This is not time to play politics with these issues. This is time for people to solve this issue and to close these loopholes to keep us safe. I want to thank the gentlemen for their testimony and the members for their questions. I want to particularly thank Director Holman for your 34 years of service to our country in many law enforcement positions. God bless you in your transition out, and thanks for your service and all you've done for us. Members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses. We'll ask you to respond to these in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7E, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days, and without objection, the committee stands adjourned.
Hi, Debbie Lesko, newest member from Congress from Arizona. Good, except you're retiring? Wow, that's a long time. Thanks for your service.
Excuse me, Ted Nesson with Politico.
You bet.
How are you? Good, how are you? I heard you mention safe third country a few times, and I wanted to ask you about talks last week with Mexican officials. What happened in those talks? Where do you see things going?
We have an important relationship with Mexico, and we continue to work with them in all realms of security. This is just part of that.
Are they open to the idea of an asylum deal?
I have to refer you to that.
Going to a hearing
categorization. They're strong partners with us. We expect that to continue. Do you know what the next steps in all this?
Thank you very much.
Can I ask you on a separate thread? Someone had mentioned that there's a possible replacement for Director Homeland. I don't know if someone has anything approached you about that or asked you about the responsibilities as the deputy.
It's not something. Yeah, this was my actually my first.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Sat in on, and then I used to leave. Hi. Debbie Lesko from Arizona. Newest member. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Well, now I'm not on this subcommittee, but I wanted to sit in because it's important because Arizona and Martha's.
Yeah. Well, good luck.
It's separate representative. Okay, all right, so the Western side, part of Phoenix, the Western suburbs, include Bacon, Force Base, Glendale, Peoria. Anyway, hi.
Congratulations. Very exciting.
Hi. Very nice. Thank you. All right. All right. Fantastic. All right. Well, now I got to figure out my way out of this one. I'm still learning the tunnel.
Hey.
You trying to get back to Canada? Well,
Excuse me. Sure.
yeah, I did. I really like that.